What's up in War Eagle, everybody? You got Ike Jones. We are back inside of LAUB Town today. Auburn takes on South Carolina inside of Neville Level Arena. Let's talk about it, baby.
The Auburn Express.
You are now listening to the War Report LAUB Town Podcast. With your boy Ike Jones.
No two ways about it. This is going to be a big game today. Both teams coming in ranked. Your 13th ranked Auburn Tigers taking on South Carolina, who are currently the number 11 team in the country. South Carolina, who is doing their thing, man. Like there's no way to sugarcoat it, man. South Carolina is a good basketball team this year. 21-3 on the season, 2 losses in conference, only 1 out of conference loss so far this year. Auburn coming in 19-5 with an 8-3 conference record. But let's take a look at the head-to-head on this one. But we're inside of LAUB Town, brought to you by BetUS, where the game begins. And hopefully everybody is doing well today. But coming in, looking at the head-to-head, 7:30 p.m. tip-off today inside of Neville Arena. Auburn is favored in the ESPN matchup predictor by 89.7%, which is honestly I'm a little surprised by. South Carolina, I think it's a little disrespectful to them that they're 89.7. I mean, listen, I know Auburn's been great at home, but I feel like it's a little disrespectful to South Carolina. But when you look at the head-to-head, South Carolina's averaging 72.6% points for, and Auburn is averaging 82.3, which of course, almost a 10-point deficit there as far as points they're scoring. Auburn is only giving up 67, and South Carolina's only giving up 64. South Carolina is one of the best defensive teams in the country. We'll talk a little bit more about why that 64 number exists and kind of how it compares. But field goal percentage, slight edge to Auburn there at 46%. Rebounding edge is to Auburn by about 3 boards per game. Assist edge per game to Auburn, about 2 boards there for Auburn. Auburn 3 blocks better per game, almost 3 full blocks better per game, and Auburn has more steals per game. The records don't bear it out, but the numbers definitely look like, hey, this should be an Auburn victory. When you just look on the surface there, Auburn playing well at home, playing against South Carolina at home. Lamont Paris coming in. I saw recently the favorites for National Coach of the Year. I think Lamont Paris ought to be running away with this award this season. He has done a tremendous job with this South Carolina team. And a team that was picked to finish dead last in the SEC is currently tied for first in the conference. And again, absent of a monumental collapse, they should finish in the top 4 in the conference here. When you look at the stat leaders for each team, the leader still for Auburn in points, rebounds, and blocks is Janai Broome, who's doing his job to be able to get Auburn into this national conversation. I think that Janai Broome is not getting enough recognition potentially. I understand what Dalton Connect is doing, and I get how many points per game a guy like Mark Sears is putting up. But Janai Broome has been absolutely masterful in his ability to consistently put up double-figure points, getting close to a double-double on average, with his rebounding numbers getting in there, and then leading the team in blocks. He's one of the best shot blockers in the country on a per-game basis. But for South Carolina, your leader in points is Meechie Johnson. He also leads in steals there for South Carolina. B.J. Mack is the rebounds leader. We'll talk a little bit more about B.J. Mack and Talon Cooper, who is their assist leader. And then Cooper Murray Bowles, a CBM for them, CMB, and we have our Chad Baker-Mazar, CBM. But Cooper Murray Boyles, the freshman there, who is if he doesn't make the all-freshman team for the SEC, I don't know who's going to, is leading the way there in blocks for South Carolina. So this is going to be a good matchup. Meechie Johnson has been one of their leaders over the last couple of years. B.J. Mack, I said we're going to get back into that. He is a guy who came from one of the, mid-tier programs, and he made the elevation up to South Carolina, and he's been a beast for them, right? In points and rebounds, he's a guy who can play inside and out. He's kind of just like a bull down low, and carves out space really well, but he can step out and shoot the three pretty well. I am looking forward to the matchup between the matchup in the front court is going to be one I think that Auburn has got to get out here and figure a way to win. But this front court for South Carolina is a good one. When you talk about B.J. Mack at 5.1 boards per game, he is a guy that's going to pose some problems for Auburn, again, as he can step out and shoot a little bit too. He's averaging 13.6 points per game, and he has been a difference maker for this South Carolina team. He is probably going to be initially matched up a lot with Jalen Williams, but, of course, Auburn's going to, send a flood of folks at you. But they've got a pretty deep four-man rotation that they like to put in there for when you talk about Stephen Clark potentially coming in there and playing a little bit. They have, let's see, when I look at their rotation here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 guys on this South Carolina team that are playing over 10 minutes per game. So they're going to send a wave of guys at you. It's not going to be one of those games where Auburn's going to be able to outlast you. In fact, South Carolina, the way that they want to play is really just to get into slowing the tempo down so that they don't have to really exhaust their bench. They are a team that wants to be patient and make sure that the score is going to stay low, which I'd say we're going to go back to the number that they're averaging defensively. A lot of that has to do with the pace of play in which they use. They're going to try to slow the game down and make it a half-court game and make it a situation where they're going to take it late in the shot clock, and they're going to get good shots late in the shot clock because they're going to be patient and run their offense, and they're going to try to run their stuff, and they don't want to get into this up and down sprint fest. So they take care of the basketball because of the patience that they have. Taylon Cooper, their assist leader, he's a guy his efficiency is through the roof. They have effective guys in the half court who are playing smart basketball, and they really want to kind of just choke the game out for South Carolina. So it's going to be an interesting style clash because Auburn's going to need to get out, I think, and force turnovers, which they did not do in their last contest against Florida, in order for this to be a game that Auburn can come out with the victory. When you look at the Vegas stats here, courtesy of our folks over at BetUS, again, where the game begins, you can get a sense of Vegas actually favoring Auburn pretty heavily as well. 11.5-point spread in favor of Auburn, and they're expecting to score to be relatively low scoring game, right? When you look at the scores here, expecting for both teams to be around 80 points overall. I mean, neither team to score more than 80 points. Let me pull up the actual team spread. So according to the Vegas line, 74.5 points to Auburn and 63. So Vegas thinks it's going to be a 74-75 point game for Auburn, with South Carolina scoring around 63. If that is the case, then this is not going to be a game that Auburn fans are really going to be excited to look at, because it's going to look sloppy. Right, and you're going to see a lot of people complaining about how bad the offense is and all this. It's going to look like a very sloppy game if it plays out in that way. But those lines, again, courtesy of BetUS. Make sure that you guys head to the link in the description. You can receive 125% off bonus when you sign up using our link down there at BetUS. If you do happen to want to get in on the action there. Again, 11.5-point favorites for the home Tigers versus the Gamecocks. When you get in here and you also look at some of the things about the history of this game, you see that Auburn is winning the series right now 30-19. So overall, Auburn's won. When we're talking about games at Auburn, Auburn has the edge 13-8. And in the last meeting, Auburn won that 81-66. So the trend is, of course, in favor of Auburn. Now, these teams have not matched up a lot when both of them have been ranked, but when South Carolina has been ranked in this matchup, typically South Carolina wins this game. So Auburn's got some work to do in order to be able to defeat the trends in that direction. Let's just take a look over here at kind of, I like to do this comparison of showing kind of how teams are versus what we see at their national average versus what they're doing in the specific environment in which we're going to be playing this game. And that is how South Carolina has done at away games versus what they've done on the season. So when you look at the season, again, 72.6 points per game, they're only scoring 66.4 points per game on the road so far this year. So South Carolina, a little bit of work to do to be able to get to their road number. And so if Auburn is able to get them in that range, I feel very confident. If this game is a 60-some point game for South Carolina, I do expect a comfortable Auburn victory, because I do think that at home Auburn has done a good job of getting into the 70s against most teams, even with a very clock stingy and South Carolina offense. That's going to be a key to victory, is keeping their offense from getting out and getting to what they want to do. Those late clock shots, they need to be able to secure the defensive rebound and end the possession there, and not let South Carolina get to the offensive glass. As far as their field goal percentage, they actually shoot a little bit better on the road than they do at home, at almost by 4%. But everything else, their free throw percentage, not field goal, their free throw percentage, they shoot free throws a little bit better on the road than they have at home so far this season. But they shoot everything else worse. When you talk about 2-point percentage, 3-point percentage, both of those drop off a little bit on the road, which is typical for most teams, bringing their effective field goal percentage down just a bit when you look at all of those numbers combined. But guys that you got to look out for, again, Michi Johnson, their leading scorer on the season. As far as assists, I said we're going to go back and talk about Taylon Cooper, who, to me, he's kind of the guy for that team. He's the nucleus. He's one of those guys. He doesn't score a bunch of points per game, but he scores enough, right? You take a look at his points per game. He's averaging 10.2 points per game. But really, where he controls it is in his ability to just not make a lot of mistakes. He is averaging 4.4 assists per game and only 1.2 turnovers. So his assist to turnover ratio is really good for a guy who has the ball in his hands quite a bit. He's a taller forward, but he plays kind of like a point guard for them. Michi Johnson's more of a scoring guard, and Taylon Cooper's really kind of the point guard of this team. So he's going to be a guy that's going to be a tough matchup. You're going to see him matched up against the likes of again, we do a lot of switching defensively, so it's not as if he's only going to be against, but Chris Moore is going to draw the defensive assignment against him initially, probably will rotate and put a little Denver Jones on him as well, specifically on the defensive end to try to get him running around and try to tire him out. And then you'll see rotations off the bench with Chad Baker-Mazar picking up the defensive assignment on him. Going to be interesting to see how many minutes a guy like Leo Berman is going to have versus him, because he's not going to be a guy who's really, his athleticism isn't what's going to get him past people. It's really just kind of his crafty play. So it's going to be interesting to see whether or not Leo Berman's going to get some minutes against him in this game. I do expect that will happen at some point in time. When you look at South Carolina defensively, and I think that this is the strength of this team, is their defense. They're one of the best rated defensive teams in the country. They actually are only giving up 66 points per game on the road. So 64 in general, 66 on the road. It's a really good defensive team that you're talking about there. They are not having a lot of defensive breakdowns. Again, a lot of it has to do with their pace of play, but they're really good at being able to make teams play the way that they want to and being efficient with their offense. They are, stifling on the road as far as free throw percentage. People are shooting pretty poorly against them. I think it's because of the physicality and the way that they play in the post, where you kind of get tired legs and you get into those close games and the free throws mean a little bit more. People haven't been hitting those free throws against South Carolina traditionally. As far as the field goal percentage, they defend the three really well. On the season, it's around 32%, but they when they're out there on the road, 27%. So again, this might be a game that frustrates Auburn fans when they go in here and they look at the stat lines. If South Carolina plays the type of defense they typically play, Auburn fans are going to be frustrated with the way that their offense looks versus this South Carolina defense. Now, what I will say is, though South Carolina is good in a lot of different areas, and I'm giving them a lot of props at a lot of things, the place I think that Auburn will actually be able to compete is as a place where Auburn has been done poorly at some points during this season, and that is on the glass. I think that Auburn can compete with this team on the glass. When you talk about their ability to get to the offensive rebounds, they've done a good job this season. Don't get me wrong. They're not the kind of offensive rebounding team of, say, a Florida or Texas A&M, but they are a good offensive rebounding team. But the reason I say that Auburn could potentially be able to do it a little bit better is because though they have big guys, they don't have the same kind of height that Florida presents versus a Florida. Because, I mean, when you look at the guys on this team, let's go back and take a look at the forwards there. So BJ Mack, for instance, he is a guy that goes 6'8", and he's their power forward, right? Him and Jalen Williams around the same height. So he's not a guy who is going to be towering over anybody in the paint. Cooper Murray Boyles, who is the other big forward that they're going to have in there, and he's their big shot blocker, is 6'7", right? And he's not a guy who is going to be, intimidating from that standpoint, which is why they don't block a ton of shots. They're not really an above the rim kind of team either. Mack and Murray Boyles aren't really high flyers. They're more below the rim type players. So they don't have a ton of height to be able to present to Auburn. And that's kind of been a thing that Auburn has struggled with, is guys with a lot of height. Coming off the bench, Benjamin Bozeman Verdonk, he is only 6'9". And I say only as if that's super short. But again, relative to the 7-footers that they just got done facing, that's not a guy that's going to present a lot of height for you. Stephen Clark is the other guy that's going to be playing in the post form. He's 6'8", right? So not a bunch of 7-footers on this team that you have to contend with. So it's really going to be really about a positioning game, and they're going to need to be fundamental. That is Auburn in the way that they attack the glass, making sure that you're boxing out, because you're going to get a ton of effort from all of these guys on the front line for South Carolina. But the height is not going to be the issue in this game, which means that Auburn needs to get back to their paint domination that they weren't able to do against Florida. South Carolina is not a team that tends to double team a lot. So Janai Broom's going to have the opportunity to go one-on-one, but they play BJ Mack and Murray Boyles, they play very similar games to Janai, where it's not, above the rim, high flying. They're just going to be guys that are going to use positioning and body. So this is going to be a big man game down low. Who is going to be able to control that really well? I think it's going to be interesting to see how Auburn decides to deploy defensively against South Carolina, who shoots the ball pretty well. They're not lights out from three, but they are a team that's able to shoot the 3-pointers pretty well. They shoot 34% on the season. It's not as if this team is poor by any means in how they're able to attack you. The other guy that you want to look out for them is Miles Stute. He is a pretty good 3-point shooter. Actually, Miles Stute and Taylon Cooper are both up above 40% in their 3-point shooting on the season. Stute shooting 40% and Taylon Cooper shooting 45.9. Now, Cooper doesn't shoot a lot of threes, but again, he's an efficient guy. He's not a guy who is going to, overwhelm you typically, but he is going to shoot the ball really well. When you look at Miles Stute on the season on the road, he's shooting at almost 37% on the season on the road. And Taylon Cooper on the road from 3-point is shooting at a blistering 60%. So again, a very efficient guy when you're talking about Cooper. And so this is going to be a guy that Auburn's really just going to need to get the ball out of his hands and stay stuck to, because he's a guy that can be a difference maker for them on the offensive end, I think, in this game. Overall, again, all these analytical models, none of that stuff really matters, but they do all favor Auburn fairly heavily in this game. And I think South Carolina is going to come into this game, I know South Carolina is going to come into this game feeling disrespected by those numbers. They're going to feel as if, hey, we're the higher ranked team, but we're not getting the respect of an 11th ranked team in the country right now. And they're going to come in with a chip on their shoulder. It's going to be important for Auburn to weather whatever storm of emotion comes out initially from that team. They're going to want to come in and be physical and try to dominate in that way. And Auburn just needs to be solid. What they were not able to do against Florida, be solid the entire time. Just be there and be solid against this team, whether whatever the initial punch is, and then punch back like they were able to do against Alabama, against Ole Miss. Need to see that Auburn basketball team tonight in order to come out with the victory. So looking forward to seeing what happens, and I definitely want to hear from you all again. Appreciate everybody for jumping in here with me. We are here inside of LAUB Town, brought to you by our good folks at BetUS, where the game begins. Let's go over to the comment section. Green Name Gang, I got y'all. Let's get in here and talk about it. Valencia starts us off and says it's because Janai is at Auburn, and for some reason they can't give Auburn their due. Talking about why Janai Broom's not getting more into the conversation for SEC Player of the Year or even Naismith Player of the Year. I think that he's made a he's made a name for himself to be able to be a go-to guy for this Auburn team, and I think he's going to want to prove a little something tonight because recently the conversation around in this last game you heard the commentary. I don't know whether or not you did hear the commentary, but a lot of the folks on the SEC network talking about whether or not Auburn has the best front court in the country, and some people want to give them that due, but some people don't feel as if that's the case. I think tonight's a night where you need to be able to dominate because this is a good front court coming in with BJ Mack and Cooper Collins. I'm just calling people all kinds of names that are not their names today. I don't know what is up with me and stumbling over people's name. But Colin Murray Boyles, when you get those two guys on the court, Jalen and Janai need to be able to be difference makers for Auburn in this game. Let's see here. Max Effort says, what's the height for South Carolina at the 5? I just went over this, but again, they don't have a guy over 6'9", so this is going to be a situation where Auburn, from a height standpoint, that's what they've had problems with in the post. Auburn should be okay tonight from that standpoint. It's really going to be about physicality in this one. CT in North Alabama says, South Carolina is a dangerous team, and we will have to play well to beat them. Absolutely so. A team that's only lost 3 games on the season, I don't know how you don't feel as if that's a team that's dangerous. Again, this is a team that has played the best of the best this season in the losses they've had. Let's just kind of take a look at that so that we can get some balance to this. The losses that they had this season were away at Clemson. They lost that game 72-67, so not a big deficit there away at Clemson. That was the first loss of the season. Then they lost at Alabama. That was really the only game where the South Carolina offense just wasn't showing up, and they were not hitting threes in that game. I watched that game versus Bama. They were winning that game, or I think they were winning that game at the half, if I'm not mistaken, but they had played well for Bama against Bama in the half, and the second half Bama just ran away with it. But 74-47, 47 points. They couldn't buy a bucket in that Bama game. It was abysmal the way that they shot the ball, and it made them look like maybe they were kind of pretenders at that point in time. But they've rattled off a lot of wins since then, and the only other loss that they have on the season is to Georgia. That was a home loss, and it was kind of a stunner that Georgia was able to pull off that loss. In that game, they didn't have their best performance. Let's just take a look at that game at home. They shot 44% effective field goal percentage there and turned the ball over quite a bit in that game. And that's going to be a big key for Auburn is how often they're able to turn this team over. If Auburn can turn over this South Carolina team, this is going to be a game in which Auburn, I think, runs away with. It's going to come down to how well Auburn is able to turn this team over, I think, because South Carolina doesn't do well coming back from big deficits, right? So if you can get them into a big deficit, they don't do particularly well because they don't like playing tempo, right? So Auburn, this isn't a team like with LSU, for instance. I don't know if you guys watched the LSU-Florida game where Florida almost gave up that game at the end, similarly to how it was when we played Florida. LSU just started hitting threes, and they closed a 20-point lead down to, I think they only lost that game by like 2 or 3 at the end of that game. LSU doesn't really have the quick strike offense in that way. What they do is they walk you down methodically. So if Auburn gets a lead and then is able to protect the basketball, they should be okay in this game, but they're going to have to come out here and take this game. South Carolina's not going to just lay down. They're not just going to lay down. But yeah, when we look at, let's see, I'm trying to find their defensive ratings here as far as turnovers, I should say. I'll look that up, but yeah, I think turnovers is going to be a big key to this game. JJ Brand jumps in and says, looking for Jay Will to bounce back. I also think Denver has a big game. I think it's going to be, I've said this many times, as this offense goes, so goes Jay Will, or as Jay Will goes, so goes this offense. He's got to be a guy that's going to show up for you and be efficient with his shooting and scoring, and he needs to be a double-digit scorer for Auburn tonight in order for them to feel very comfortable in this game, because, again, the front court needs to flex a little bit in this game for Auburn. As far as Denver Jones is concerned, I think Denver has gotten a little bit better at, feeling like he can take over at certain points in games and feeling that out. He's had spots in the last few matchups where he's done that. I think that he can continue to do that again tonight. He's going to be needed for sure. CT in North AL jumps back in. It's kind of feel like South Carolina this year is like Auburn in 2010 or 2020, when Coach Pearl wore the T-shirt that read 4-14, South Carolina was picked dead last in the SEC by sports writers. Absolutely agree with all of this that you said. They come in with that chip on their shoulder, feeling disrespected, and they're going to wear that badge tonight as they go in and try to, take that disrespected feeling into the arena and feel like, hey, this entire arena is against us. Nobody feels like we've got a shot. Let's go out here. This is a prove-it game for South Carolina in a lot of ways. But I know that Coach Pearl has focused on this, and he's told his team, listen, if you want to achieve our goals, which is winning the SEC regular season title, tonight's a must-win game. Every time he circled the game on the calendar and said this is a must-win, Auburn has risen to the occasion, except for, on the road versus Bama that first time. I don't think that they came out, after all of the lighting fiasco. I think they came out a little flat in that game. But if Auburn comes out and plays like this game matters, which I think that they will, they're not going to be going against a team that's had a bunch of rest this time and a lot of time to prepare specifically. I think that Auburn can be okay in this one, but it's going to be about the turnovers to me. I think Auburn needs to protect the basketball, but they have to get back into the double-digit forcing turnovers, live ball turnovers, get out in transition, and make sure that South Carolina can't cement themselves in their half-court defense, which they play a lot better than they do in the full court. So Auburn needs to be able to get out, push pace and tempo, and just get some of that early offense going again versus a team that's not going to be as adept at shot blocking and it's not going to pose the same kind of height problems that Auburn had versus Florida. Max Effort jumps in and says, KD on defense. He's been good this season for Auburn. No two ways about it. Every now and then he'll have a puzzling turnover, and every now and then he'll take a shot that you don't like, but I think everybody has some of those on the season for every team. But KD Johnson has been a solid contributor for this team the entirety of this season, and he's going to need to bring that senior presence to this team. What really has been lacking from Auburn's backcourt has been some of the calming presence, the senior leadership, and KD's brought that. In some points, he needs to show up big for this team tonight in order for them to get the victory. Looking forward to seeing what happens in this one. All right, let me see if I can find those numbers for you guys in terms of turnovers for South Carolina. Boom, 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 boom. Appreciate you guys jumping in here with me. Let's see if we can find the turnovers. All right. On the season, South Carolina is averaging 10.3 turnovers per game. This needs to be a number that is going to be, I think, north of 12 or 13, in my opinion, for them in this game. Let's see if I can find their turnovers when they're on the road. So in away games this season, that Bama game, they turned the ball over a lot. Let me try. I don't know. All right, team stats. Here we go. All right, this is what I'm looking for right here. All right, turnover percentage. South Carolina is middle of the conference. They are 7th in the conference at 15.9 turnover percentage. So I mean, they don't turn the ball over a lot, but they do turn the ball over defensively as far as forcing turnovers, not forcing a ton of turnovers either. Again, this isn't a team that suffocates you and forces you to turn the ball over. What they do is they play solid, and they want you to make mistakes by taking a lot of early shots in the shot clock, or they want to get a lot of shot clock violations or contest late in the shot clock. The way that South Carolina is very boa constrictor like. They just really choke the life out of teams by slowing the game down, making sure that you're not able to get into your tempo, playing patient on offense and making you play a solid 30 seconds on the shot clock, right? They want you to use all of your time on the shot clock, and they're going to use as much time as they can on the shot clock to get the best shot. They'll turn down good shots for better shots, and Auburn just needs to be solid and, again, close out defensive possessions with a rebound, because that's the way that South Carolina wants this game to go. So Auburn just needs to be very efficient. This is a very efficient team that they're going against. As far as offensive efficiency, again, kind of middle of the conference, then the numbers don't jump out for you because they're not scoring a bunch of points. but they are a team that is able to play their style of basketball, and they are committed to that style of basketball. Again, props to Coach Lamont Paris for what he's been able to do with this South Carolina team. I'm looking forward to this matchup nonetheless. But that's it, man. I'm done rambling for you guys. But what I want to hear is score predictions from you guys. How are you all feeling about the score for this game? This game set to tip off at 7:30 inside of Neville Arena. Make sure you give me your score predictions, and I definitely want to hear those. But before y'all get off of this video, make sure that you're sharing the content out there with somebody. Give us a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We'll be back at you with the post game once this game is done. If you're not out there doing Valentine's stuff, then we'll still be here. But until then, and as always, War Eagle.